Welcome to the Madness and Grace podcast, where we discuss the connection between mental health and faith. I'm your host, Dr. Matthew Stanford, CEO of the Hope and Healing Center and Institute in Houston, Texas.
And I'm your co-host, Dr. Maddie Stiers, Chief Clinical Officer of the Hope and Healing Center and Institute. We're so glad you're joining us today.
Each week, we explore personal stories, expert insights, and the profound ways faith can influence our mental well-being. Whether you're seeking comfort, understanding, or simply a new perspective, we're here to journey with you. Thank you for tuning in. Now let's get started with today's episode. Hello and welcome to another episode of the Madness and Grace podcast. I'm your host, Matt Stanford, and with me, as always, is Maddie Stiers. How are you today, Maddie?
Good. Excited for our guest today.
Yeah, very excited for a great guest and a good friend of the Hope and Healing Center. So I want to just introduce our guest today is Reverend Amy Bezecny. Amy is the founder and CEO of a ministry called Cultivating Families, which we're going to talk about today a lot. So I'm going to not talk about that right now. She is a graduate of the University of Houston and the SMU Perkins School of Theology, where she received her Master's of Divinity. She's ordained as a deacon in the United Methodist Church. Prior to starting Cultivating Families, she worked at St. Luke's United Methodist Church here in Houston, where she launched their adoption ministry. And she was at one time in the distant past a research fellow here at the Hope and Healing Center. And that's how we know her so well. She was actually here when I got here 10 years ago. She was here developing some of these incredible programs that she has for adoption and foster care. So welcome, Amy. Why don't you tell us a little bit about Cultivating Families?
Hi, Matt. Thank you so much. Cultivating Families, we exist to empower communities of faith, to welcome families and children impacted by foster care and adoption into the very lives of their congregations. And we do that because these families and these children need hope and they need belonging and they need community, maybe more than other people do. It's vital to their success.
Well, since we're going to be talking about adoption foster care today, why don't you give us some insights into the current state of adoption foster care, say here in Texas and nationally? What are you seeing out there? What are some of the problems? Have you seen any successes more recently?
Well, yes, that's actually a great question for us right here, right now in the Houston area, because the child welfare system has been changing slowly in the state of Texas. We're rolling out in different areas of Texas what is called community-based care. And it's a complete shift in the way that child welfare is done. It is moving the responsibility for the children once they are in the system, the responsibility moves to a single provider who then contracts out to other providers to help out. But in essence, this community-based care is exactly what it says or what is in the title. We are reaching out to more of the community for the different parts of the community and the talents and the skills and the resources that each different part of the community brings to make families successful. And so we're shifting from so much being on the state's shoulders to reaching out again, community-wide.
And well, that makes a lot of sense, both, I would say, logistically and economically. I mean, why do you think they have never switched to that in the past?
Well, it came about over 10 years ago, if not 15, with, I think, some lawsuits and some holding people accountable and then redesigning and researching and look at what is needed. And that's how it came about. Why we didn't think of it sooner, I don't know. But it has been rolling out in other areas. It hasn't hit our area yet because we are so big. And a little bit complicated, but it's very soon. It's very soon.
So practically, what does that look like when that switch moving into the community? What kind of support do you see the community offering in the places that have rolled this out?
Well, Well, first, I guess practically what it looks like is the CPS, or the Department of Family and Protective Services, will still have responsibility for investigations, all of the reporting of any suspected abuse or neglect will go to DFPS. They will do the investigation. If a child needs to be removed, they remove them. Okay. Instead of then, I don't know the exact point, but instead of them being responsible for foster care, for recruiting and managing all of the foster care families, that goes to a single provider, which has not been announced. So I don't think that I can speak to who that provider will be, but it'll be a single provider, and we won't eliminate all other providers. And when I say provider, mostly it's child placing agencies. Right. And so that will still work in a similar way, with that each agency will do their part and have the number of children that they manage and recruit and families and all of that. So right. The community piece is a lot of awareness, a lot of education. You've got the judicial system, you've got the educational system, and then you've got community wide. And that's one thing that Cultivating Families really focuses on, is that nobody, I think so far, even in this new way of doing things, specifically mentions faith communities and what faith communities can be doing. And so at Cultivating Families, we believe that spiritual nurturing is as important as meeting the children's physical, mental, social, emotional needs. That might be a given in some nonprofits around, but we speak to it, we research it, we raise awareness about it, and teach people why that is so important.
Why don't you tell us a little bit about how do you see faith communities being involved in supporting families and kids in this system, and what does that look like on a day-to-day basis?
It is. It's definitely not rocket science. It is becoming aware of who the families are. It's becoming aware of the foster care system, what it is and what it isn't, reasons people are involved in the foster care system. It is a lot of awareness and a lot of education. A lot of our time is spent on awareness and education. We have to get to know the people that we want to welcome into our communities. We have to get to know the people we want to welcome into our very families, maybe eventually. And so that awareness and education. And the first piece of that is compassion for the families and the children. Less judgment, more compassion is what's important before you even begin welcoming them into the life of your congregation. But it does go beyond that. Then you need to be trained, and you need to develop skills for trauma-informed and trauma-aware care, because the children have different life experiences, and they're going to relate to life day in and day out in a different way. But that doesn't mean they don't belong. We need to develop those skills so that we can welcome them. So it's the awareness, and it's the education and skill building, and then just some concrete things that help with the awareness. We do those through activities like a prayer initiative, where you're beginning to pray, but you're also learning a lot through the prayer initiative. There are little service projects which are actually meeting physical needs, donation drives, building beds, first night toiletry kits, things like that. You're actually meeting a physical need, but the purpose behind all of those is raising awareness and educating. So there are different ways to do that. It's not just coming and speaking.
So all of those things that you just kind of outlined, those are things that Cultivating Families does within different faith communities.
Yes, we will do all of those service projects, all of those awareness events in different faith communities. I will tell you that most communities we are involved with are churches. Mm-hmm. Our nonprofit works with multiple faith communities. So we are actively engaged with mosques and synagogues. We have by nature, I think, done most things with churches.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Sure. So working with the different faith communities, I mean, you're in it. You're kind of, I know you started your nonprofit here when you were at the Hope and Healing Center. So you've seen it from its infancy all the way to where it is now. I guess, what are some of the success stories that you could share with us, or some of those, the things that keep you going, the reason you're doing it?
Yes. Well, that's kind of a touching story, actually, because about a year and a half ago, almost 2 years maybe, we sat around our board table and asked ourselves, the question, do we need to keep going? Do we need to keep doing this? And the reason was it's never become what we originally designed it to become. Right. And so we sat around there and asked that question. And someone finally looked at me and said, why do you keep doing this? Why do you get up every day and keep doing this?
Yeah.
Even if it hasn't become what we all originally thought it would become or planned for it to become. And I stopped and I said, I wake up every morning. I don't know how these particular children and these families have hope unless communities of faith can engage and welcome them, help them feel connected, and help them feel like they belong. And a child can't be out there navigating the world alone.
Sure.
A family that adopts a child or a family that is fostering children cannot do it inside their own home alone. We all need community to do it successfully.
Right. For those that are listening, a lot of people probably, they hear about adoption, they hear about foster care, they probably have heard some horror story on the television or on the news. But could you maybe just give them an idea of, what is your average adoptive child? Who are they? How long does it take a child to get adopted normally? I know you gave me I know when you were here at the Hope and Healing Center, you used to give me some great statistics on how many kids were in, for instance, the Harris County, which is the county Houston is in, how many were in the system that had the parental rights have been removed and they were waiting to be adopted. And you also once gave me some statistics that I'll never forget about kids who age out of the system, where they are just a few months to years afterwards. I was wondering, maybe you could just give the listener some idea of some of these statistics. And I know they're pretty harsh and difficult, but these are children that are waiting for someone to care for them.
Right.
And we don't want the state to have to do that. The state can step in and protect them for a short period of time, but maybe you could just give them an idea of who these children are.
Sure. Well, most of the children are in the foster care system because there's a breakdown in society, really. And I was just teaching some children this morning about foster care and adoption, and emphasizing to the children in a vacation Bible school program that if a child is in foster care, it is never, ever, ever the child's fault.
Right.
These are adult issues, adult circumstances. Each case is different. There are many, many different reasons. But if their home, they're born into home is not safe enough, then the rest of the adults around will step in and make sure that they're safe. And so who they are, I will say that there've been trends. I've been doing this for so long. My son is over 20 now, and he came to us when he was 2. At the beginning of that, there was kind of a trend where keep them safe, get them out of an unsafe space, get them into the system, get them adopted if that's going to be the route. And then the pendulum swung all the way to keep them in their biological family. By all means, keep them there. And then we're finally, I think, coming back to some middle ground of let's look at it case by case, circumstance by circumstance, and what is best for the child. And so these children come from neglect. They come from possibly physical harm. Mostly it's neglect, where they're not being fed properly. They're not being taken to school. They're not being supervised, and maybe there's dangerous people around. And so the children have grown up caring for themselves or being scared or traumatized, which is changing, as y'all know so well, the pathways in their brain. And we're getting all the way into trauma response for many years to come for these children. The statistics are similar than they were when we talked 10 years ago. But the main thing is in the greater Houston area. It's not just Harris County. So it's Region 6 of the Department of Family Protection regions. It's Harris and all the surrounding counties. And there are still, 3,000 or so children in care in just our region. And I don't have the latest number for aging out. It hasn't gone up or down drastically. So the numbers I gave you a long time, at the time you were right, that was 1,400. So we can say at least 1,000. I don't know the exact number today, but the kids in the system are a challenge to care for because of the trauma. It's difficult, and we have to develop skills as parents to care for them, and the wider community has to develop skills to care for them, beginning again with compassion. For those that age out, the statistics are still tragic because they will age out with no long-term relationship, safe long-term relationship. And I don't know about y'all, but I still need people as an adult to turn to when I'm upset, to turn to when I'm elated with joy, to share big things with in my life. And we all need each other. Sometimes these children that age out don't have anyone to count on. They could end up often addicted, in prison, pregnant, bringing another child back into the system, in gangs, living on the streets, and some of them just not living very long. When we as a state, when we as a community, or let's say when we as faith communities together don't care for them, that's what's happening in the end. And the odd juxtaposition for us at Cultivating Families is some churches and some faith communities will see me coming and they will put their hand up and say, oh, we don't need to talk to that adoption lady or that foster care lady. Our passion is doing prison ministry, or our passion is building homes for the homeless, or our passion is the youth in the gang ministries. And
you don't see the connection.
You know what? It's all the same, and we could care for them a little bit earlier, up the road. Yeah.
I love that you said, you started off with saying that the children who find themselves in these situations, it's never, ever their fault. And then, because I think that that's a misconception that just society might have when they think about foster and adoption. You think about adoption and it's trying to adopt, we're trying to build our family, but they don't think about the older kids that are in the foster system and adoption. But those have been labeled as the problem children. And maybe that's why they ended up in that situation, when the reality is they struggle with life, and because of the trauma that they've experienced, it's the environment, the adult issues, the family system that has landed them in the system, and it's not at their own doing. And the result of that is the trauma response and the trauma symptoms, and that's what leads to those other things that you just kind of outlined. And I think oftentimes that's flipped in people's minds, is like, these are just bad kids or bad people, and it's just not true.
Right. So what you're describing is often ends up being, it's been on the news, so I know it's becoming a more common term in knowledge, but the CWAP, or the children without placement, they're more the older children. They are a big challenge. There are big behavior challenges with the older children, but you're exactly right that it's not their fault. It's their response to what their life has been like.
Yeah.
So are they difficult? Yes. Does it require great skill and passion and as a wider community, it requires a response from a psychiatrist or a psychologist within 30 minutes sometimes on any given day, or the police or medical professionals. But they're still worth caring for.
Right. Absolutely.
Right. It's not their fault. They're still worth caring for. And that is one thing that is being developed over the last 5 or 6 years, I think. We've started trying out professional foster families, where they have extra training for the behavioral issues of some of the older children, and extra resources, and some extra support financially. So it's not, so they're in an individual home, but those particular foster parents have more training and more skill development to care for these older children that are harder to handle, right, day in and day out.
And that's a great idea. I mean, that seems like something we should have been doing a long time ago, obviously. So particularly when we know it's more difficult for older children to be adopted just because they're older, but whether they have a problem or not. Just most people, when they want to adopt, they want a baby. That's, they're thinking about a baby. And so, they don't think about an older child. And then the potential for long-term exposure to trauma and neglect and the effects that that's had on the child. But, we just want to emphasize, as you have, it's absolutely not the child's fault. And they're not a throwaway, broken doll. I mean, these are gifts from God that human beings, their parents probably, have seriously damaged by the way they have cared for them or not cared for them. And we, particularly as people of faith, we have a responsibility to step in and to try to help them move forward. So let's say I'm a pastor out there of a church, and I'm listening today, and I think, well, what can my church do? What can my faith community do to help families that might think about adopting, or help families that are fostering a child? Or how might I support children that are in that system? What are some things that I might do simply on my own? Or what are some things I might do if I contacted your organization or other organizations that are similar?
It may sound odd, but I am ordained clergy, so this is what I say, and that is begin with prayer, because and begin with our prayer initiative, because in that packet of our prayer initiative there is a lot of information about foster care. It's a great beginning step. You're going to learn what it is, what it isn't. you're going to get a set of 10 children that are your 10 children to pray for a year. And so we believe that when we are in prayer for the children, that two things are happening. One, we're bringing God into the circumstance, and that is very powerful. We're bringing God into the circumstance, the relationship, the community surrounding that child. That's powerful in and of itself, we believe. And then in addition to that, we believe that this prayer initiative and praying regularly for these children, thinking through a child, their age, their gender at birth, thinking through when their birthday month is, even though we cannot know their name or their exact circumstance, it opens our minds. It raises curiosity about their lives. And we believe that these prayers, when they're broadened throughout the community, can lead to really concrete action, concrete things happening, more prevalent in the community. So maybe a family is praying through our prayer initiative, and they start to wonder, maybe our family could babysit foster children and give that foster family a break. Or maybe we would be a family that could learn more about it and possibly take in a child into our own home. Or maybe our small group or Bible study or other gathering of a group could start to do donation drives and meet real physical needs or become mentors. And the list can go on and on and on. But we say begin with prayer, which is beginning with awareness again and education. And then the service projects, all of those are always available in a good way to meet that basic need and learn about foster care. But our hearts, beyond the prayer, it is with the education and the skill building. So as a congregation, it's actually similar to your Gateway of Hope training. It's that awareness, recognizing it, and referring to professionals as necessary when you're aware of adoption families and foster families. But it's the heartbeat of it is staying in community with them, welcoming them in. And when I say education and skill building, it is the trust-based or the trauma training. It doesn't have to be extremely extensive, but your child care workers in the nurseries need to know how to respond to the major tantrums. Your major top-level volunteers in children's and youth ministry need to know. It is good for pastors to know. So developing skills around trauma for your staff and your volunteers is going to be an excellent way to welcome families and children.
Yeah, being the trauma researcher that I am, it's great for, exactly what we're talking about, and for everyone else who's experienced trauma that shows up at a faith community looking for support and has responses to situations and things that might seem abnormal or out of the norm. So, yeah.
Well, we're going to make sure that we put contact information for Cultivating Families in the notes with this episode. And I imagine that if they contacted you, they certainly can, or look at your website, they certainly can get connected with your prayer initiative. Now, how often do you is that one time a year they do the main prayer initiative and then they pray, and then they pray for those children through the whole year, or is it something that they can connect in at any time?
They can connect into it anytime. When I say once a year, we update the list once a year.
Oh, right. Okay, great.
We have a contract with the state to get a new list every year. And so that means that if we get the list in October and you're just joining in August, there's some shift. There's some children that are no longer in the system that are on our list and some that have entered. But we have a way to pray for those also in the packet.
Well, I really remember when you were still here with us at the Hope and Healing Center, you had such a such an incredible vision. It really touched me. The idea that, when, I remember at that time it was, 14 or 1,500 kids in the area were in the system, and the parents' parental rights had been removed, so they were ready to be adopted, and yet we had, probably 4,000 or more congregations here in the same area. And I remember you one time telling me if just each congregation would have one family that was willing to step forward, and then the congregation was supportive of that family, all of the children that were in that system could be adopted out and taken care of completely. The system would be cleared out. And, when you start to think about it like that, it becomes the overwhelming problem that it is starts to be more kind of plausible that it could be actually taken care of. But it also really, I think, is, it's a real call to the church to say, hey, it's time to stop talking about this stuff and do something, and I'm, really supportive of your idea of bringing prayer into this, and prayer is a starting point. But I think, prayer is a great place to start. But I do think you're right. I think as people are actively involved in praying for these children and learning about these children, God starts to work on their heart and say, well, it's time for your congregation to take a step. And if really just one couple in a congregation was willing to step forward and say they would adopt or foster, then that congregation has an opportunity now just to support their own congregant and a new member who is that child, and so it really starts to be less of a we're going to just step out here all by ourselves and see if we can make it, and much more of a, I hate the old cliche that we use so much, if it takes a village, but it really is you really now have a group of individuals that are going to be supportive of this child. It often reminds me of, in particularly in Christian churches, when children are either dedicated or baptized, a lot of times, the pastor will turn to the congregation and say, ask them some questions. Will you support this family? Will you? It's the same thing. It's absolutely the same thing. And what an incredible, statement that would be if a congregation would bring forward a family that just adopted a child out of the system and ask them those same questions. Would you be willing to support this family as they raise this child? That's your vision, right? That's what you're looking for.
Yes, it's completely doable. Now, people listening to that, I guess, is been our frustration after so many years. And when I say that the nonprofit hasn't become what we designed it to become, there's something blocking that simple message that of the numbers of children that need families, and the number of churches, or if you broaden that, the number of communities of faith or congregations. So there's a lot of thought out there that adopting or fostering is a private, personal decision. And at some level it is. You're talking about your family. And it's not like any other ministry or project. Even if it's a long-term ministry where a congregation or a group in a congregation is actually in relationship with the people they're ministering to and with for years and years, they're still going home at night.
Right.
Or they're still going back to their own congregation on Sunday morning. Some of those things are like, you might mentor a child at your local school and stay with that child through the years, through his schooling years. That's a long-term relationship, and that's a beautiful ministry to have. But when we're talking about foster care and we're talking about adoption, we're talking about they're coming in to that couple's home for 24/7. If it's adoption, it's forever.
Right.
And we're talking about that couple and that family being a part of your congregation on Sunday morning, on Wednesday night, at VBS, at summer camp. It's a part of your life.
And you being supportive of them 24/7, not just when they show up for an event.
Yeah.
When they're having problems on a Thursday night because the child maybe acted out, you need to be supportive. I have a question for you, and this is, I mean, I may be way off on my thought here, but do you, as somebody who really is, you not only are you an expert in adoption foster care, but you have the lived experience of adoption foster care. You like you said, your son was adopted. It. Do you think that, one of the issues is, and this is just a general societal issue, that particularly adoption. I mean, it really actually is a more modern thing that we talk about adoption, foster care at the same time.
Right.
Adoption is really, I would say, to most people, looked at as an option for infertile couples.
Mm-hmm.
It's an opportunity for you to have a child when you aren't able to biologically have a child. Is kind of the way that's the way you unfortunately think about it. You don't think about it as there are children that are desperately in need and they need someone to help them and care for them. It's really more of a, like, we don't have a child and we can get a child this way. And it's not that that's a bad thing,
Right.
but when you think about it only in that way, then once a child passes a certain age, they're no longer a commodity. And and also you don't think about it as in the great need that it is, that there are literally in the Houston area right now, there are literally thousands of children that need someone to take care of them. And we kind of wait till infertile couples step forward and say, we want to have a child, through adoption. Let alone foster care, which has its own kind of frightening concept to it, that somebody's taken a child away from their parents and now I'm going to be the one that's going to care for them for a while. And what happens when they get taken away from me and given back to somebody? Will I be able to handle it? Do you think that, I guess that's a long way to say, do you think that the way we have conceptualized adoption in our culture is probably a significant hindrance to what your vision for the church being part of this?
I'm so glad that you described all that and brought that up. I don't know if it's all of society, but I can tell you that because those that are adopting a baby, an infant from a birth mother, there's a lot of that is what you described. But if you're adopting a child from the foster care system, it's a bit different. And so the question you're asking, or the direction, actually, our whole first class, which is 2 hours, we have an adoption and foster care decisions course, and I wrote the curriculum while I was there during my fellowship. It's really more of a parent-to-parent course where we are walking people through specifically the decision. Do we want to look further into bringing a child into our home through adoption or foster care? It's a gap that we noticed, something that wasn't available before. Before this curriculum, people would just have a whim that they think they want to do this. They would go to an information session, and actually, when you do that, you're starting the official process. And so, we wrote the curriculum to fill a gap there, that to educate people and help them walk through that decision. The course is now 3 weeks. Each week is 2 hours. There's a lot of reading and online things to do between the classes, but the whole first class, the whole 2 hours, is on compassion for the biological family and not judging them, because what they're dealing with is most likely generations and generations and generations of whatever issue has appeared at this time for this child. I can say that personally for our adoption experience, is that when I read the file of my son's birth mother and her family, my heart just went out to her, and I've prayed for her ever since, thinking that somebody should have stepped up and helped her. But this notion of just growing our family and infertility, and growing our family through adoption as a kind of a plan B is not the best approach when we're entering into foster care, or even, I believe, also adoption of infants. What we cover is, what is your reason for coming to this class and learning about whether or not you want to do this? And there are two extremes. If you're coming to fill a hole for you, which would be kind of what you described, we can't have a baby, so we want to foster or adopt a child to fill that hole in us. If it's that reason, that's too much to ask of the child. You cannot put that burden on a child to fill a hole that you had. If you are doing it because, and this is the case often with people that are parenting a second time around, or they have parented and their children are grown and they did an outstanding job as parents raising kids, and decide they still have some parenting left to give, and so they want to foster children, to parent more that need parents. Or maybe you've heard your church or your community is saying somebody needs to step up and do this, and you step up as the couple that does it. That's the other extreme you want to be careful of. None of this is bad, but you want to be careful of these extremes. You cannot do it to save a child, because you can't be the savior and they are the one in need. That's too much for either of you. And what we end up with in the class, and try to drive the point home, is that every relationship is two ways. Whether it's a friend to a friend, a spouse to a spouse, a boss to an employee, every relationship out there is two ways. Each person in a two-person relationship brings their past, brings their baggage, brings their joys, brings their successes. And the other person does too. And that's how we have to look at these children as we enter this process or this decision. They are going to bring their past. It's going to affect the relationship. Mm-hmm. They're also going to bring the child God created them to be. And it's going to be a beautiful surprise and positive thing. So we have to look at it as a relationship, and a relationship that has to develop, and a relationship that we have to work on. It's a parent-child relationship, and it's not one way.
Very wise words, Amy. Thank you so much for that. And thank you for being with us today. As I said, we're going to put the information for Cultivating Families in the notes if you're interested in learning more about that. Just thank you for what you do, and hang in there. It is, I think that, not unlike even what we do here at the Hope and Healing Center, it really is about having to re-educate the culture on what this is that you're dealing with. They just don't see it the way that it really is. And a lot of that's because of the media and films and, all of those types of things. And so you've got that. I do think you're spot on with the church is really the answer here. There's an incredible opportunity, and you're making a real difference. So I appreciate you being with us today. Thank you. I appreciate the invitation.
Thanks, Amy. We're glad to have you.
Okay.
Join us next time on Madness and Grace.
Thanks for listening to this week's episode of the Madness and Grace podcast. Make sure to subscribe wherever you listen so you'll never miss an episode. While you're at it, if you found value in this conversation, we would love it if you would rate us and leave us a review. Lastly, sharing this podcast with a friend or a family member is a great way to give hope to those who may be struggling with a mental health concern. See you next time as we discuss Madness and Grace.